What's up, Knife Tube? It's Diamond Cut Steel, and you guys are going to learn something today. So, how's everybody doing? Hope everybody's well. Hope life is treating you good. My last evening with the grandchild for a little while. Had her for the past month, and have greatly enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm 100% gonna seriously miss her when she's gone. And I'll be looking forward to the next time she's over. So, it's another late night, typical insomniac. Freaking stuff all over my little table. Late night. So, why not film a video? Now, what we're going to do, it's something that is not talked about very often. In fact, realistically, there's only one YouTuber that I know that even discusses this stuff. It's something we've been doing for a very long time. It really hasn't hit the limelight, I guess, but pretty much the only person I've ever really seen on YouTube talk about it is Home Slice. If you guys are familiar with him, you'll know what I'm talking about. I know that Pete from Cedric and Ada has done some tests on the edges he's done. And basically what that is it's a dual grit edge. One side one grit, one side another grit. We've been playing around with this for many years. Hell, I can remember, talking about it on forums many 20 years ago, probably more. I don't really understand why it's not. I mean, it is a little aggravating to do, so I can understand it from that end, but I don't understand why it's not went mainstream like I figured it really should have. It's actually quite surprising. Like I said, hell, I remember talking back with some friends of mine in Japan, back in the AOL Messenger, like AOL, dial-up modem AOL days. I was probably 19, 20, something like that. And then, telling me about these edges that they do over there. I had never heard, at the time, I had never heard of them before, never heard anybody here talk about it. And I tried, and we've been playing with it ever since. And many years ago, there were people that we chatted with, just from the forums and stuff. And yeah, I don't know why you don't really hear about them. Like I said, I can understand from they are a slight annoyance to do, but not really. And depending on a couple factors. Now, see, the only reason I can think, and I'm sorry, I'll get to doing, I'm just talking right now like typical. It's late night, y'all are gonna hear me. That's just how my videos are, y'all know that. But the one thing that I believe may have been what has really held dual grit edges back would be just the simple fact of, if you don't do a very good job on them, you will have a relatively poor performing edge. And you may have put a significant amount of work in these edges, and yeah, if you don't do a exceptionally good job, you'll have wildly varying results. And I think that may very well be what has held these edges back. And another thing, certain steels don't respond very well to them. From my findings, the stuff that don't do really, that I've never seen giant increases in performance with, would be your really, really high hard carbide stuff. Yeah, the steels that are full to the brim of really hard carbides. Not so much the stuff with softer carbides. Take M398 for example. I've had many ZDP 189, very good edges. They held up incredibly well, dual grit edges on those steels, and they are absolutely full of carbides, but mostly chromium carbides, so not super duper hard carbides. And where I have me personally, where I have really seen these edges be truly worth their weight, worth the time to do them, the aggravation, is on your more basic steels. Perfect example, this knife right here. This is a knife, as you can see by the handle. I carry and use this thing a ton. I love this knife. The Air Ranger, it's a freaking awesome little knife. The Pledge, another one. I use this knife a lot. You know, I mean, this one's already had enough edges on it that I can see a noticeable difference in the width of the blade. But yeah, like this knife right here, I love this knife. It's a great knife. I love this pattern. I have a bunch of them. I love them. They're great. I carry them a lot. They're bulletproof. They're 7CR. You know, you can't expect a whole ton of edge retention out of them. You're not going to get it. But for doing the type of stuff that I'm typically doing chore-wise, you know, feed bags, soil bags, ropes, heavy ropes, twines, cutting dirty materials, stuff that's really tough on edges, and I mean really tough on edges. I can get this stuff to perform exceptionally well with a dual grit edge. And when you say, oh, it's 7CR, you know, man, that stuff don't stay sharp hardly at all, blah, 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 you know, all that bullshit. But, you know, even with a single grit edge, yes, this stuff doesn't last very long. But with a well done dual grit edge, you can make this stuff cut for a very, very long time and just do a good job, especially when it's on cutting your more, you know, abrasive stuff like you know, dirty feed bags, or soil bags, burlap, you know, just typical materials like parents use around the farm, stuff that you know, it's outside, it's drug around, it gets dirty, and all that silica and, you know, contaminants that get in that material can really eat an edge up. And that is where a simple steel like this and a dual grit edge can truly be impressive. And I mean that literally. It can be impressive. Not just good, impressive. You know, let me make sure y'all can see. I'm sorry, I know probably 15 minutes into the video and I'm just but you know, that's part of my charm, I hope. You guys that enjoy my videos, y'all know that's part of them. I'm gonna talk. That's what I do. You know, it's part of the teaching. It's part of the sharing of knowledge. But anyways, on kitchen knives, that was predominantly many years ago when we started discussing this, and you know, I talked with some Japanese folk about it. That was where it came from. There was, you know, it was, I don't know if it's necessarily popular, but it was used over there on kitchen knives, and you know, they want as long as possible usable edges that they can bring back very quickly on a strop, and they'll just continue to cut for a long time on, you know, your low alloy carbon steels that don't have very high edge retention. And anyways, that's, you know, that's how I learned about these. And I played around with them, and for a while I thought they were terrible, to be honest. It took me a while to learn how to do them, and even when I thought I was doing a good job, I don't know if I was, you know, because the edges, they didn't perform how I expected them to perform. I was told, you know, man, you won't, it's a large difference. Over the life of the edge, it's a large difference. And I just wasn't seeing that. Yeah, after a while, I kept playing with them, and I started to see, hey, you know what? Okay, this is clearly cutting longer. You know, we're at the you know, deer camp, hunting club, and you know, using an old carbon steel sharp finger, and typically to get through one deer, you know, you're needing to touch that. You're definitely needing to touch that knife up. By the time you get through a deer, you're getting pretty daggum dull. And to keep it cutting good, you know, you'd touch it up halfway through, and so on and so forth. And now, all of a sudden, these dual grit edges, same knives, and some, you know, just basic, cheap stainless steel kitchen knives. And instead of needing, you know, by the time you're getting close to finished with one deer, and you're getting quite dull, I'm noticing that I'm cleaning, you know, 2.5 deer, 3 deer before I'm like, man, this knife is, you know, it seriously needs a touch up. And then when, you know, we're butchering everything, and you know, you have 5-6 people who's killed a deer, and you're all out there working, and I'm noticing, hey, you know what? These knives, usually they're needing a touch up pretty quick. You know, get them on that ceramic rod pretty quick, and or on the, what the hell's that thing called? Turn box. You know, getting on that turn box, and damn, was that a spider? There's a spider on my table. Anyways, yeah, I'm starting to notice, okay, man, this is making a noticeable difference. And on that, you know, on that carbon steel sharp finger, man, it was rather large. And back then, you know, I'm using very simple stones. I believe at the time I was using if I'm not mistaken, I was doing a DMT 220 and a DMT 1200, I believe was what I was doing. And on that simple carbon, you know what, man, I gotta get into the video. This is 15 minutes. People aren't gonna stay. I gotta stop doing this. I gotta start getting into the meat of the video quicker. So anyways, let's just get to going. But point is, it took a little while to learn how to do them. It took a while, and trying different, you know, where I really noticed the biggest difference at first was on that carbon sod buster. I mean, sharp finger. That's where I really seen a definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, noticeable difference in use. And that, you know, the little stainless steel kitchen knives I noticed too, but it wasn't as much. Wasn't even close to as much, actually, but it was there. Now, in today's world, you know, with perfect example, this knife right here, you know, just out using it for my typical type tasks, and you know, the difference between a single grit edge and a dual grit edge on like this is night and day. I mean, it literally is. It's night and day. So what I'm gonna do, one thing I've learned is if you go too extremes on, there's some steels that work very good that way with, say, a 220 or 320. Just say a 320 one side, 6,000 the other side. Some steels work very, very good that way. But not that. What I've noticed is it's more consistent. I get a more consistent, large, noticeable improvement if I don't take as drastic of a step. So like right here is a prime example. I'm going 100 micron, 30 micron. That is going to be a very good performing dual grit edge on a lot of different knives, a lot of different steels. Is where, say I went 320, 6,000, the amount of knives and steels that I'm going to see a noticeable gain, it's just not as much as it would without that giant of a jump. Now, don't get me wrong, 130 is, you know, that's a significant jump. But I'm talking about, you know, a very aggressive one side and then a mirror polished other side. When I do that, it's just not as consistent. It's just not as consistent. Like M4, for example, on, you know, Golden Colorado Spyderco M4. If I go like a 220 diamond plate on one side, and then a 6,000, you know, a 2-3 micron resin bonded diamond stone on the other side, and that's how I do it. I'd say about 1 out of every 4 edges, it seems like I have a problem with it. Versus if I go, let's just say, yeah, I go a 220 or 320. Let's say I go 325 on one side and a nanowad resin diamond stone 3000. I get a very large performance increase. It's consistent. I get it every single time. I know that's very reliable with M4. Yeah, like a, you know, for example, like a Sharpall 325 or DMT 325 and a you know, electroplated plate, and then a 3000 grit resin diamond stone. That is a very, very reliably good edge for M4. I know it's going to perform good for me every time, but when I polish one side to a very high degree and leave one side very coarse, that's when I see the, okay, this edge was great, this edge was great, man, this edge wasn't. This edge was great, this edge was great, this edge was great, this edge was terrible. Like, I don't, and why, I don't know. I don't know what causes that. But I do know that if I keep that spread a little tighter and don't do the two extremes as much, I get much more consistent results. So I'm going to shut up now that y'all listen to me yap for 20 freaking minutes. We're going to go ahead and do this edge. So now, it's not necessarily hard. You just have to watch what you're doing. So we're going to go 100 on the clip side. Whoops. Got it on the plunge. And, for the type of use that I do around my chore when I'm doing chores, a steel like this should not give me a ton of performance. I should dull this knife exceptionally quickly because it lacks any much wear resistance. But with a well done dual grit edge, it will surprise you, and this becomes a absolutely viable knife. I like the design. I don't like the steel particularly, but it becomes a solid performer for me, and that's what I care about. Okay, so now I've got my burr. Now, I'm going to move the 100 out the way. We're going to go 30. Now you could go, say you were trying, this edge was still relatively sharp, or else I would go, I would finish at 100, and then once I got, raise my burr, flip my burr, then I would move over to the 30 on one side and go back and forth working my burr off, okay? But since this was already in good shape, I don't need to do that. I'm simply going to treat this just like these two stones are one. One side's going to see this side, the other side's going to see the 100. Now, one thing I will tell you, when you're doing dual grit edges, take your time. And the reason I say that, it's very easy to get sloppy, trying to go quickly between the two stones. And what ends up happening is you'll run yourself into a trouble where you're going to have a very difficult time getting the burr off. So take your time. Make sure your angle is very consistent, very accurate. Get your scratch pattern very consistent. Now, I know I have my burr foot. Whoops. I see that's not what I'm doing, so it's off my stone. I know I have my burr. Beautiful. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to go back over to this hundo. Alright. Now we have two completely different edge finishes. I have a nice light but consistent scratch pattern here that's got, starting to get some reflectiveness to it. And over here I have a clearly much larger scratches, and it's easily, you can definitely see the difference, okay? And to me, that ends up being, you wouldn't want to do like a 600 1000. That, like, I've tried it. It's a waste of time. There needs to be a relatively large difference, but not, in my opinion, to keep it consistent, not too large. This right here would be a perfect just an overall perfect dual grit edge setup would be a 30 and 100 micron setup. That's going to work good on a lot of steels, and just going to be an all-around good dual grit edge. Okay, so now remember, we want to make sure we get very consistent on our angle. I want my angle exactly back where I was on this 100 micron stone. So I'm going to be very diligent in making sure that I'm starting it at the same angle, and that I'm maintaining that same angle. Now, since I've already raised and flipped my burr, now we're going to just start refining that burr down. Okay. We're just going to getting our scratch pattern nice and consistent. We're just going to focus on being consistent and accurate. And this is why, I say there's some there's some aggravation in doing these edges. They are a little more aggravating than your typical edges. So, and a lot of that has to do with just taking your time and being very careful in making sure that everything is consistent. And that will play big time into being able to make sure you can get the burr off cleanly, especially on these type of steels. Okay, we're just gonna back and forth refining that burr down, making sure my angles are very consistent. Start just working lighter passes. Just kind of getting lighter and lighter. Now, I'm not going to fatigue the burr as much as I normally would do. Now I'm going to start going the edge leading passes. And I'm going to start using progressively lighter and lighter pressure as I alternate back and forth between the stones. Remember, wipe your blade off in between because you are carrying grit over. Okay. And we're just refining that burr down. And now, if you notice, on this side I was going like this. Now, if you notice, I'm going to start going like this because I'm going like this on this. I want to keep that scratch pattern shaped the same, so I can't go this way on one stone and then this way on the other stone. You understand what I'm saying? So we're going to start to straighten that up. Now I will say, on certain steels, especially if they're not done the best, you will see tougher deburring. It may very, remember you're dealing with a larger burr than you typically are dealing with, even as you're refining it and making it smaller. You still have this 100 micron stone over here that, so you just have to take your time with deburring. Okay, we're going lighter and lighter. And now I'm just letting that abrasive just barely touch the edge. See, I can feel that burr getting just smaller and smaller, and that's what I want. And it's super important to make sure you keep your angle very consistent with these edges. Remember, they're going to perform for a longer period of time for you. You can expect that out of them. So, if you put a little more time into the edge while sharpening, it's worth it. Now I'm getting incredibly light pressure-wise. To where I'm just barely letting the knife, the edge touch the abrasive. Nowhere near the weight, like not even close to the weight of the knife. I'm just literally letting it just touch it. And we're starting to feel very, very clean. I don't feel any dragging of that burr now. So that means most of it is off of this edge right now. There's probably still a little bit. There's probably still, well, not probably, 100% there's still a little bit. Excuse me. So, now, I personally do not like to touch my dual grit edges to a strop that has compound on it. Okay? Some people do, they'll strop both sides of the edge. I will not. I think it kind of defeats the purpose. I will only use a piece of leather, no compound. What works really good is if you have a denim strap with no compound on it, just plain old denim. Here we have just a clean piece of leather. You can use basswood, just something to just kind of weaken that burr without changing without any polishing effect. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, I know there's no abrasive on this strap. Okay, so I'm simply going to, at sharpening angle maybe slightly above, and of course with very light pressure. Okay. What we should have right now is a very aggressive yet sharp dual grit edge that will last notably longer than this edge would ever last with a single grit edge. Beautiful. Look. Okay. I think there's a little piece of burr left. Look at that. Now with a 100 grit edge, I'm push cutting. I mean, 100 micron edge, I'm literally push cutting. Like, I'm pulling the paper, I'm not slicing with the knife. That one caught slightly. But that's 100 micron edge. Okay. Sorry, my camera died. But anyhow, this edge, that's 100 micron. There's a 100 micron scratch pattern on one side of this edge. Okay. That is not something that you're going. 100 microns is way too coarse that you're going to push cut newspaper. Okay. Oh yeah, that's very, very sharp. Lots of bite, a ton of bite. That's a very, very good edge. Now this edge right here, I would say if I was to rope cut, you know, do a sisal rope test with this, at minimum, I'm going to gain 50% over like a, you know, 600 grit diamond stone edge, you know, 1,000 grit diamond stone edge. I would say at minimum, I'm going to gain 50% off of this edge. And another thing it'll do, it will continue to cut better for far longer than a single grit edge. A single grit edge will start, you know, about halfway through the edge of, you know, say I'm doing a cut test, about halfway through the cut before the knife will finish, you'll start to feel it drop off. You'll feel it drop off every couple cuts. You'll just notice it gets a little harder to cut. A little harder to cut. A little less bite. This edge here, I guarantee you, will not, I mean, of course it's going to cut longer. Like I said, I'm going to say around 50%, maybe a little more. But what it'll do is it will stay cutting like it does at the beginning. Nice and aggressive and just ripping through the rope. It will continue to cut like that for probably 80%, maybe 85% the life of the edge, you know, for where it's going to finish its test at. Let's just say, to make math easy, let's just say it did 100 cuts, and with a dual grit, and without the dual grit it did, we'll just say 50, trying to make math easy. With this single grit edge, by the time I've done 25 cuts, I'm going to start noticing, okay, every couple cuts it gets a little harder, just a little less bite, a little harder to cut, maybe taking another sawing or two, another pass or two to get through the rope. That'll start happening at about 25 cuts. And, by the time, say, you get to 40, it's starting to really have fell off. And even though it's not failing the test yet, it's being quite difficult to cut. Now, let's say the dual grit edge did 100 cuts. And it's not going to start falling off at 50 cuts. It's going to start, I'm going to start noticing, okay, it's getting a little harder to cut. I've lost some bite at probably 80 cuts. Maybe even 85 cuts. And then it's going to start to fall. Once it starts to fall off, it will fail faster, okay? So like is where with the single grit edge, say it starts falling off at 25 cuts and makes it to 50 cuts before it'll fail. With the dual grit edge, it's going to, probably go, like I said, 80-85% of the, or 85 cuts, 80-85 cuts, and then at 100 it would fail. So instead of it taking 25 cuts for the edge to go from, okay, I'm noticing that it's falling off until it finishes its test, now it's only taken 15 cuts. That's how you want it to go. You want it to cut as good as it can for as long as it can, and then once it starts to give up the edge, it gives it all up quickly. It gives you all the performance in the beginning where you want it. You want it to cut as good as it can for as long as it can, and then once the edge starts to degrade just quickly and be over with. Versus it going, okay, you're at 50 cuts and okay, I feel it starting to fall off now, and it giving you another 50 cuts, and every 5 cuts is getting substantially harder to cut. You understand what I'm saying? So it's giving you a great cutting edge for not only longer overall, but for just a longer percentage of time of the life of the edge. I'm somebody who, I want my knife to dull exactly like that. I don't want it to every 5 cuts to get a little, to just get a little harder to cut, and a little harder to cut, and a little harder to cut throughout the life of the edge. I would rather it stay consistent and cut as good as it can for 80% of the the life of the edge, and then, or 90% of the life of the edge, and then all of a sudden, oh, hey, I just noticed that cut was a little bit harder, and now it's done give me 90% of the, just say 90% of the life of the edge, and now, oh, it's starting to get a little dull, and now it's just going to fall off quickly, and it's time to touch the edge up. I would prefer it dull that way, rather than, okay, I've done 5 cuts, man, it's a little harder to cut than it was, and then another 5 cuts, and it's gotten a little harder still to cut, and then 20 more cuts in, man, I don't like an edge that breaks down like that. I would prefer it to break down, and that's what dual grit edges do. They break down differently than a single grit edge does, and they don't break down. They kind of give you it all, and then once it starts to go, it goes. Versus it just kind of gradually declines in sharpness over the whole life of the edge. I would rather it just kind of stay flat and give me great cutting ability, and then it's reached that point where it's starting to dull, and now it just kind of dives off. That's how I like a knife to dull. That's why I like Crewware so much. Crewware is a prime steel, of a steel that will, and this was a normal edge. Crewware will give you a sharp edge and as soon as it starts to fall off, that's it. It's going to go from sharp to dull very quickly. Once it reaches that point of where that edge is giving up, it'll go from steel quite sharp to dull very quickly. All of its performance is in its fine edge, if you will. So it's gonna cut good for the most, 90% of the life of that edge. And then once it starts to fall off, it just goes from, okay, it was cutting great, to, okay, it's not cutting very good at all now. It does it all at one time. You get all the performance here, and then once that performance kind of ends, that's it. It's time to take care of the edge. As compared to, say, a steel like Maximet or S30V. S30V is a steel that it has great edge retention, but that edge, it just slowly declines. Every cut, it just gives up a little bit of sharpness, and it, halfway through the edge of that, the life's edge, you have lost a lot of the sharpness. It's not cutting all that fantastic anymore. You can tell it's dulling. And then, you know, it'll just kind of continue like that. It'll just get a little duller, a little duller, a little duller, but it never just kind of falls off. Cruwear, exact opposite. Gives you all the sharpness up front, and then poof, once it dulls, it's it. I prefer the way Cruwear dulls. It's one of the reasons why it's one of my very favorite steels. I want a steel that will stay as sharp as it can for as long as it can. I want, if it could give me 60, 70, say 60% of its edge life was a shaving quality edge. And then once it reached that, okay, about 60% of the life of the edge, all of a sudden it just goes from hair popping sharp to just kind of dies off. If I could get a steel that would do that, I'd be all over it. Because ideally I want to have as sharp of an edge as possible for as long as possible. That's one of the beauties of a dual grit edge. It just works that way. It's going to give you as sharp of a knife for as long as possible. Once that edge starts to die, it's going to die very quickly. But that initial upfront sharpness lasts for much longer than a single grit edge does on steels, on most of them anyways. So I know I've been running my mouth for a long time, but I'm gonna start playing around with more dual grit edges. We're gonna test some of them. In fact, we'll do side by sides. We'll do a single grit, cut test it, sharpen it with a dual grit, cut test it again, same video, and you know, we'll just see. We'll do some with, you know, a really large variation between grits, like a 220 to 6K, or a 220, 328K, something like that, 228K, whatever. And we'll do some with a more tight spread, like a 100 micron, 30 micron, or 100 micron, 50 micron, or, you know, we won't have such a drastic jump between microns, or like a 320, 320 grit 3000, like that. And we'll just we'll start doing videos on that, and we'll kind of get a feel for, just with most steels, what does the best. From what I know so far, and I do these frequently, I get more consistent results with a closer, without such an extreme gap in grits. 130, 100 micron, 30 micron, beautiful. Now, don't get me wrong, I've had fantastic with like a 228K or 226K. It's fantastic results, but it's not consistent. And it's not as consistent from steel to steel. Some steels really do not like that. They perform very poorly. Some do, anyways. Some perform great like that. And then if you get a steel that performs great like that, you put an edge on it, it's great. Put another edge on it, it's great. Put another edge on it, exactly the same, bam, it's terrible. Put another edge on it, it's terrible. Put another edge on it, it's great. I don't like that inconsistency. That is why, from my findings, a closer grit range works better, like a 223K. Something like that. It's not so extreme. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope y'all found this interesting. I hope you learned something. I'm sure there's probably some of you that don't even know about dual grit edges, or have never thought about it. They definitely have their place. They definitely can make. They can be surprising, actually. They can take a steel that you would think is not going to do very great for you and make it do quite phenomenal. I have an 8CR Tenacious, Spyderco Tenacious, that I do exactly the edge I put on it every single time. A Koromaku 220 and a Rockstar 3K. I will tell you, that piece of 8CR with that dual grit edge on it at about 16, 17 degrees per side will absolutely impress anybody that uses it. It just cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts, and it's shocking how long that it will cut, so long as you don't do something to actually damage the apex. It just cuts. You know, I joke about it, and it's like that 223K on that 8CR, and it becomes Maximet. Like, it just cuts. And you know, that knife has seen a shit ton of work. That is a knife that has done a insane amount of work around, you know, here and parents. And with that edge, it's just that edge and that piece of steel with that specific heat treat, that specific piece of 8CR, and it's a match made in heaven. It just performs. So, you know, if you've never tried one, try it. I believe that a lot of you guys will be genuinely surprised at how much of a difference it can make. How it can take a piece of steel that just doesn't perform, you know, it's nothing special in any way. Perfect example. And turn it into something that just performs fantastic, and it just cuts, and it cuts for a long time, and it cuts good for a long time. It doesn't, when you're cutting into something, it doesn't slip. It just digs in and cuts. That is exactly what this edge will do, and it will do it for quite a long time. All right, guys, thank y'all for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. I know I talk too much. I'm sure some of you enjoy listening to the whole thing, but I'm sure I drive a lot of you guys away, and I'm sorry. I genuinely am. If I talk to you too much, if my videos are just too long, too much talking, and y'all don't like that, please tell me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I make this content for you guys. I don't make it for me. I make it for y'all. So if me talking rather than doing drives you away from the video, or you get bored with the video and click off of it faster, please tell me. That way I can, you know, I can see the percentage of people. If more of you guys enjoy the long videos and long talks, okay, I will continue it. If most of you guys don't, then I will condense it, because I want to get as much information to you as possible. I want to teach you as much about this hobby as possible. I want to give you ideas to experiment and to, you know, to play around with the sharpening hobby. It's so fun, and to get the most out of your knives. I want to give you that. I don't need this information. I already have it. And how I convey it is by talking. And I know my videos get too long. I know most of you guys will not stay for an hour, but if y'all aren't telling me, then I don't know. And if y'all don't want to hear so much talking so long, and you know, so long of videos, and you want to see more doing, please tell me, and I will condense it. I will make them shorter. I will make them fit what you guys ask for. Whatever it takes to get as much information to you guys as possible is what I'll do. All right, y'all have a good one. Good night.